G'day, I'm Sean and welcome to the CarExpert Podcast. It's everybody's favourite week. It's VFACTS week. We've got James here. How you doing, James?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Very good. I'm very excited to talk all the VFACTS numbers with you. And because he did such a good job and because Scott's away, we've got Josh back as well. How are you, Josh?
I didn't know if I'd get a second run, but here we are.
Wait, the people spoke. They liked you. They said you had better hair than James, and I can't disagree with that. So,
And I'm wearing socks.
I think my mum loved you on last week's episode as well, so I think you've done well.
Well, we're bringing you in. You've had a run on the podcast already, but we've brought you back to talk VFACTS. Now, this is one of the toughest things that you will do as an automotive journalist is break down VFACTS. And I think you got a free pass this month in terms of writing on the website, but we're not letting you off that easy with the podcast. So we're going to dive into it. We're also going to be talking about Ranger price increases, but that's later on, so stick around for that. Let's just get into VFACTS. 92,000 deliveries this in April, not this month, but in April, which is, it's down on the last couple of months, but I still think it's making us look bad, isn't it, James, when we said that it's going to fall off a cliff this year?
Well, I definitely said that I think it was going to sustain, but I know you and Scott had said that you were expecting it to fall off. But, there's still a lot of industry trends like, supplying back orders and that kind of thing. I think there's still a level of sustained demand with all the new product coming into the market at the moment. So to see it sustain at the moment in terms of volume is not a huge surprise, but there's been a lot of movement in terms of which brands are doing really well, which models are doing really well also. So it's been really interesting to look at the charts and see, who's winning, who's losing, and everything in between.
Well, in terms of winning, you've got to sound the bell. The king is dead. Long live the king. The RAV4 has knocked off the 4x4 utes from the top of the charts, which, when was the last time that we didn't see a Ranger or a Hilux on top of the charts? It was some mid last year or something,
something like that, yeah.
So, okay, let's just get into that quickly. So RAV4 had 5,857 deliveries. Ranger wasn't that far behind with 5,569. Where's this come from? Where do we think that RAV4 suddenly come from?
Well, Toyota has said that it's really working to get better supply of its hybrid cars, and RAV4 has been basically the leader in hybrid for a very long time, but one of the main issues of getting the cars here was the fact that Toyota just couldn't get the cars out of the factory. So earlier this year, the company said that it would work to get better supply, not only to reduce wait times for new orders, but also to satisfy the massive backlog of cars that it had probably ordered from the last 12 months. There were people being quoted 12, 18 months, sometimes longer wait times on RAV4 hybrids, and subsequently like the Lexus NX, for example, which shares its platform. So I think what we're seeing is that we're just seeing these back orders be satisfied by Toyota, and they're just the cars are just rolling in droves at the moment. So
yes, a lot of boats coming out of Japan. Well, Toyota haven't completely lost out. So Hilux was third, 4,693, which is nearly 1,000 less than Ranger. And I think what we see with Hilux mostly is government fleets, 4x2 sales, that's where they're getting it. Ranger's mostly private buyers. Everest 2,400 and D-Max rounding out the top five with 2,380. Now, for those of you playing along at home, I find this quite funny. Ranger and Everest, so in total for the month, Ford sold 8,648 cars. Of those, only 679 were not a Ranger or an Everest. So for those of you that forgot that Ford sells other cars, they sold 679 of them. But yeah, okay, so let's dive in. Josh, you're new to the VFACTS world, and you're new to the automotive journalism side of things. I guess what's really surprised you? Like, what sort of things have you learned from VFACTS that really surprised you coming into this world?
I suppose I'm seeing a lot more utes on the road now and noticing them a lot more because, their sales dominance is incredible in this country. And I suppose that just shows, what we use our cars for here.
Yeah, I mean, it's the 4x4 sales have been out of this world the last couple of years. I think it's surprised everybody. Looking at the numbers, so we'll get into EVs shortly, but we'll just talk about overall figures. We've got our list of top 20 brands and top 10 models here. Josh, what surprised you out of those that was higher, lower? What did you expect to see, or what surprised you there?
I think some of the rising brands, so in terms of like GWM, their sales were up 50%, which is a pretty significant figure. And then, going further down the list, Tesla had a massive drop-off, 43.5%. So probably James can speak to that.
Yeah, well, we saw Tesla had a couple of really good months because I think after the Model 3 debacle with the ADR thing, they paused a shipment that was coming in, and therefore there was a big dumping of cars, I think around March. And so, it obviously made their sales look really good. And I think there's been fairly solid order banks of the new Model 3, but I think we're still waiting for the updated Model Ys to come through as well. So perhaps people have ordered a new one, that might be a couple of months away. And I think it's interesting to see how with electric vehicle sales, globally we're seeing a reduction in demand, and it's been something that we've reported on quite comprehensively. In Australia, we're still a little bit further behind than a lot of other markets, so that hasn't necessarily been reflected here, and Tesla especially has been driving that change. I think another thing to note is that Tesla and Polestar are pulling out of VFACTS counting. So I don't know whether moving forward that could skew how EV sales look in official reporting, because for the longest time the Model Y, especially with its success, has been driving that massive growth in EV sales according to official statistics. But then now that they're moving off that by the end of this financial year, and I think Polestar's already completely dropped off it anyway, it could really skew how that gets reported. So even though there's a drop at the moment, I don't know whether that's necessarily accurate given all the cars that are coming into the country from everyone, not just the manufacturers that are listing their figures.
So EV sales were down about 5% for this month. Now, one of the things, we spoke about this on the podcast when Tesla and Polestar pulled out of the FCAI. Do you feel that's going to have any effect ongoing with them? Because Polestar's got a whole bunch of new models coming. Tesla, obviously, like you said, new Model Y will arrive here, but they dropped completely out of the top 10 irrespective of that. Do you think that some consumer confidence will be lost if we're not seeing them monthly, like listed monthly in these sales charts?
It's an interesting topic. I think Tesla's volume was fairly inconsistent anyway, because originally it was like quarterly shipments that would really inflate at various points in the year, and then you'd see a drop off. I think the overall yearly figure might be really affected, but we're also going to start seeing a lot of other brands bring in their new products. And I know, for example, Volkswagen and the Volkswagen Group as a whole are bringing in several new electric vehicles in the same space that should be pretty high volume. The not Model 4, the ID4, see, that's how confusing it is. The ID4 especially, they haven't even priced it yet, but they're really hyping up the level of volume they're anticipating. And I think the recent NVES bill for emissions regulations could really change the allocation that the Australian market gets. The Kia EV5 is on the way as well. And we know that Kia is looking to do at least around 1,200 of them a year based on their initial forecasting. It could grow, and BYD and other brands are very confident about their vehicles that are coming into market at the moment as well. So we could still see it drop off a little bit given how much volume, say, the Model Y does. And with a new update, all these new updates coming in, that could change as well, because there might be a certain trajectory that's not recorded. But I think it's really just, we have to leave it up to chance and see how it moves from here.
So one of the big things, whilst EV sales were down, hybrid sales were up 194% and plug-in hybrid sales were up 135%. Because Scott's not here, we can talk about plug-in hybrids. So I think it's interesting looking at the numbers. The guys who are doing hybrids and plug-in hybrids, Toyota, Mitsubishi, right up there, they were 5th for the month in terms of deliveries. Do you think that the confidence in EVs is down a little bit and people are trying to take the safer alternative? They want to be green, but they're still wanting to have that, sort of safety net of having an internal combustion engine in the car?
Well, I think, one of the interesting things I found about hybrid sales was that Toyota accounted for 66% of that figure. And so when you think about the fact that, RAV4 as a standalone example is really inflated at the moment because they're fulfilling back orders. I think some of that growth is the fact that so many cars have been supply restrained that now that they're coming in, it perhaps inflates the figure artificially. So just looking at the figures that we have, nearly 11,000 hybrids of the were sold in Australia last month were just Toyotas, which means that Toyota hybrids, if they were a standalone brand, would have been second on the charts. So that shows you just how important that type of vehicle is for Toyota. And I know that Camry was doing really well, even though that car's actually off sale at the moment because they've got so many back orders as well. So I think it's perhaps, again, it's hard to tell when a lot of these brands like Toyota and some of the other brands with a high mix of hybrids that have been struggling to get supply of are finally getting volume. And then, Tesla is moving off VFACTS, so their figures may seem lower. I think it's hard to make a definitive call on that.
All right, so James, what was your surprise pick of this month then?
There was a few there. Well, Toyota's growth was huge. It was 72% year on year and the market leader. So it's pretty hard to inflate by that much on figures that large. Ford had a really good month as well. Everest had a huge month with nearly 2,500 sales, which I think is another new record. They've just kept on setting new records. So chartering your own ship seems to work.
Yes.
GWM, which includes Haval and Tank and stuff, had a pretty good month, and they're now 9th in the standings, which is pretty interesting. A lot of that seems to be off the back of a big month for the Jolyon. I'm starting to see them everywhere. So another thing as well that I saw was that BMW was up by nearly 20% and is again number 1 ahead of Mercedes-Benz and Audi. So they're pretty firmly like the number 1 luxury brand.
Well, they've had a stack of new and updated models come through the last couple of months. So that's probably helping them a lot.
100%.
All right, Josh, while you're here, I wanted to get a prediction from you. Where do you think we're going to see car sales go later this year? They're going to dip, they're going to climb, is there going to be some surprise winner? You don't have to know, I just want to hear what you think.
Well, I think the initial projection was that they would fall. So this kind of casts a little bit of doubt, but I still would expect them to fall over the long term. And I think you're starting to see some of that in the used market where prices are dropping a lot in that market. So yeah, I think some of these figures are surprising, but they might not last.
Now, one of the things you actually do as one of our marketplace journalists, you actually go out and speak to dealers quite regularly. So whilst we're here, we're talking about car sales. What sort of things, what murmurs are you hearing from the coalface?
Mixed reports. Some of the dealers we've spoken to, they've been really happy with their sales and, they're doing good business. Whereas others, they're a little bit, I don't want to say disappointed, but sales are down and perhaps they expected that in the first place. But they're not doing quite as well as they'd want to.
All right. Well, I think we're still on track for another record year. We'll have to wait and see. I don't want to speak too early because my prediction's been quite terrible this year.
Yeah,
but,
don't jinx it.
Yeah, I'm not going to put any money down on it. But it seems the appetite for new cars is not going away. The appetite for big vehicles is not going away. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
People have money to spend, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. I thought we were heading to a recession, but maybe not. All right. I do want to give us a little self-plug here. We've had our first drag race go live on the channel, and we've done drag races before. You guys, well, James, you've partaken in a few of them.
Won a few,
lost some more.
Yeah, well.
But this is the first of a new series that we've actually been doing on the channel. So we took a Hyundai Ioniq 5N, which is one of the most insane cars that you can buy right now, and it only costs 100 grand. We took it out to a runway in Western Australia, and we pitched it against a swathe of supercars. We wanted a 6-cylinder, an 8-cylinder, a 10-cylinder, a 12-cylinder. Now, if I told you guys this a couple of months ago before we did it, what would you have said? Would you have said the EV would win, or would you have said the supercars will just walk it?
I mean, that's what the EVs are made for, isn't it? Straight line speed. So I wouldn't have been completely shocked with the results. But yeah, I just found it so sad to see some of my favourite cars just get absolutely blown away by this EV. Yeah.
What wasn't sad was seeing Albors lose a lot of those races, so that was quite entertaining. Look, this is the thing. So this is the first of a series that we're doing. We've got a stack more kind of roll out on the YouTube channel over the next few weeks. So make sure you are subscribed because we're going to be racing some pretty ritzy SUVs. We've got some limousines. We've got some windowless cars that we're going to be racing. So a lot of really cool stuff. They're all going to be pitted against the Hyundai Ioniq 5N, which is, I mean, I was there and I'm still so blown away by what that car could do. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, and they're going to be rolling out every second Friday. So yeah, keep an eye out. Subscribe, ring the bell icon. Okay, guys. This is the what would you buy this week? Because Josh is here, in honor of him and his hard work that he's been doing on the website, I want to know, based on boot size, if you were thinking about maximizing your boot size space, what mid-size SUV would you buy? Josh, we're going to go to you first.
Well, I've got a bit of an advantage here because I know some of the numbers. You've probably got more experience of actually driving the cars, not necessarily seeing the numbers.
Spreadsheets that you have.
Off the numbers, it's the Land Rover Discovery Sport by a long way. In that medium-sized SUV segment, it has a massive boot, over 1,100 litres with the third row folded down. And looking beyond the numbers, I suppose you think about things like the shape of the boot and what kind of space it has. And it's got that tall roof line, which means you can stack it right up. It's not sloping or anything like that. So that would definitely be the pick.
What about you, James?
I guess there's a one thing to quote outright volume, but then also, my driving experience kind of comes in here, like actually seeing how these things are shaped and all that kind of thing. I think the Korean twins in the Tucson and Sportage do a really good job at just having a massive boot that's like, it's long, it's also tall, so you can fit larger items in there. Then the Haval H6 is massive. Like, people don't realize just how big that car is, not just in the boot, but also the back seat. So if you're going for like outright space, it's pretty hard to beat. And there's a lot of those mid-size SUVs in there that, you know, you look at something even like an X-Trail or an Outlander, physically they're huge, but their boots are not quite as large as some other cars in the segment. So there's a couple in there, I guess maybe for outright space alone, maybe the Haval, because it's just so massive and it's just really nicely shaped, so you can just throw anything in there and not really have to worry about it.
And that is top in terms of the more budget options. The Haval H6 is top, so you nailed it.
There you go. So 2 left field options based on VFACTS. They're not up at the top of the charts. But if you're considering what did you have? You had an X-Trail, a Sportage, a Tucson.
Just all the same.
Or a Haval.
I can't name my favorite child. You know what I mean? They're all so wonderful.
If you're struggling to decide between which of those mid-sized SUVs you'd like to buy and you think that the boot space might help you decide, well, check out Josh's article. We'll put a link in the description. Or head to Google, type in Help Me CarExpert and try out the Car Chooser. You can actually whittle it down by picking an SUV, a mid-size, and actually setting a price. And it'll list you all of the options that are available. We can connect you with a dealer and get you a great deal on a brand new car. So head to Google, type in Help Me CarExpert. And if you do use the service, leave a comment, let us know how it was. This next topic is kind of a funny one. I guess it's not entirely surprising that the Ford Ranger price has gone up because they have sold a lot, and I guess they sort of think, well, demand is there, so we can raise the prices and people are going to buy it. But I guess the surprising thing was that they said, we're going to raise the price but remove some features, which is, I mean, it's not the whole story, but it's the headline feature. So James, I guess give us a little bit of context into what's actually going on here with Ranger and Everest prices going up.
Yeah, so Ford is quite well known for doing really random model year updates. So sometimes it's like MY24.25, then 0.5, then 0.75. I'm not sure which one of these is it, but basically from June 1, the Ranger will be copping a $1,250 price rise for the V6 models and just $250 on the 4-cylinder ones. And then for the Everest, it's a little bit larger with a $1,625 increase for Platinum and then $250 across other specs. And I think the variance is more down to what adjustments have been made. So I think the ones that have been hit with the most price rises have gotten some new features, but also had some things taken out. Whereas I think the other ones are just more down to like shipping and supply and material costs, which is something that's not new. It's something that we see rife across the industry at the moment with new cars.
So some of the things that are going missing, Everest are going to lose a hands-free tailgate. Personally, I could do without that. It's the whole, you have to wave your foot weirdly in the car park whilst holding your shopping bags to open it. They're getting rid of the My Key. Now, what is the My Key program, James?
So the My Key is a programmable key, which I think you can set profiles in it so that, you know, say you have it for your partner, or I think the more important one is for your kids, where when they start driving, setting like speed limits and that kind of thing.
So the P-plates go on, the speed drops.
Yeah, exactly right. Which is a really innovative idea when you think about it, because in a lot of families, these cars are driven by multiple people in the household, and you know, you can't always supervise them, especially once they get on their P plates. You're no longer required in the front seat, and if they're going out somewhere, you want to make sure that they're not doing anything silly if you can control it. If you don't trust them as well, because you should be able to trust them. But so that's one of the features there, which is a cool feature to have and something that they've boasted about in the past. But I guess it's no more.
Now, and Ranger has lost the My Key thing as well, and it's also, what else has it lost?
Automatic high beam.
That's the one, automatic high beam.
That one disappointed me a bit, because that's a feature that I think now is so common, and it's actually quite a handy feature to have as well. It doesn't always work properly, but there are already enough people that just don't drive with headlights. But when you go outside of where, you know, Metro, Melbourne, or whichever capital city you live in, it's very, very common for people to accidentally leave their high beams on and then not realize when you're flashing at them to turn them off. So a feature like that is very handy, especially in a car like a Ranger or an Everest, where they're probably quite regularly doing country touring and things like that. That anti-dazzle function is quite important, and it's a shame that they've taken it out of basically all but the top grades.
Well, it's funny because when Ford launched the Ranger, that was one of their big selling points, was the headlight system. So it's interesting that's gone. But look, a lot of this, my understanding is it's come down to customer feedback, that people either don't want them, don't use them, don't need them, and that's where Ford are actually making these decisions from. Is there any truth to that, James? What do you think? Like, you actually used to work for with Ford.
Well, I know that with Ford as a particular example, based on my own experience, they're obviously very in touch with dealers, and therefore they're probably very in touch with their customers as well. I find it hard to believe that some of these convenient features would be taken off the list purely because people say they don't want them. Like, I really don't think auto high beam and an automatic tailgate, I can't imagine someone being like, I hate this thing, I don't want it anymore, take it out. And then what are they going to do, buy another one without it? You know, that I find that hard to believe. I think it's more they've perhaps, surveyed people and to understand which features are important to them, and then perhaps these come at the bottom of that list, and they've maybe been like, oh, we can probably get rid of them for a little bit and say, you know, remove the need to raise prices more, perhaps.
So Josh, you recently worked your way through a couple of different Everest specs. From stepping up from your daily driver at Volvo into the Everest, I mean, how did you find all the tech in it? Did you find like there was too much you could do without it? Did you find it was just the right amount? Where did you sit on that?
No, I think it was just about right. Looking at the changes that have been made to pricing here, I think it's kind of promotes the 4-cylinder bi-turbo diesel, because I drove both engines and I found myself really liking that 4-cylinder bi-turbo. So whether that, you know, changes the sales either way towards V6 or 4-cylinder, it'll be interesting. But yeah.
I mean, we have seen V6 is hands down the favourite with buyers. Now, some of the things that they are actually putting in the car, which some of these are quite cool, I quite like them. So the Trailer Pro backup assist system, which is quite neat. So when you have a trailer attached, there's a little dial that you can actually use to help steer the trailer back in rather than having to work out which is left and right and up and down and all that. That's going to be standard on the top spec model Rangers and Everest, and it's going to be an option on the lower spec models, which is really cool. XL base Ranger is going to get heavy duty suspension, which is quite a good upgrade. I think to have that come standard, I mean, that's reasonably where we would expect that spec to be, is doing those sort of workloads. And they're going to put the flexible rack system across Sport and Wild Track, which again, I think is a really, really good feature.
Is that the sliding sail plane?
That's the sliding sail plane.
That's
now,
cool.
Now, whilst you're not going to be able to load huge amounts of weight onto the sail plane, to have that functionality is really good, because the fixed sail planes are kind of pointless, to be entirely honest. And XLT Ranger and Sport, you can get the backup assist for $1,650. Look, I guess, where do you guys think? Do you think that Ford is still pushing the boundaries forward? They're still the market leader, even with these sort of decisions? Do you think they're actually looking at it and going, we just need to stay ahead? Or do you think they're going, we know what a ute needs to be?
That's a good question. I think these things are just running changes because I think they have such a high level of orders anyway. They don't have to do too much to change it. You know, they'll probably come into a time where they're like, okay, for this next round of factory orders, we need to streamline something, or we need to sort of prioritize what we want to bring in, because, you know, there might still be chip shortages, for example. There's still brands that are currently being encountered with shortages on components and things like that. So perhaps Ford's had to prioritize that in the Thai factory to make sure that the stream of units coming in is still strong. I think, though, that, you know, we've all now driven Rangers and Everests fairly extensively at this point. And I think common complaints is that they still reserve a lot of the really good features for the high spec models, and you can't really option. Like, you know, the tow stuff is one thing, because everyone that gets these cars has the potential to tow, and that's one of the selling points for a more heavy duty, you know, ladder frame SUV or dual cab ute. But, you know, having some of the larger screens, or, you know, the headlight tech and some of the other stuff that is reserved for the higher grades, I think that's something that Ford really needs to focus on moving forward, because, you know, again, their customer base are likely people that are quite adventurous, or they go outside of town quite often. You know, that headlight tech, even as basic as auto high beam, or having the option of those higher spec matrix LEDs that you get on the top spec models, I think that's really important. I think Australians need to get more serious about headlight tech, because it really does make a difference. You know, we're worrying about wildlife. I had a swipe with a wallaby the other day on a drive. You know, a lot of people have to worry about that, or just being able to see on a country road. It gets really dark at night and there's not a lot of street lighting. So I think that's really important, as well as, you know, screen and assistance tech. I think it's not a good idea to be taking those things out. I think we should only ever be adding to those things unless you absolutely have to take them out.
Okay, so we've got a new Hilux imminent. Well, I think we're getting it in and testing it very shortly with the very active technology. And a new Triton has just dropped in. Granted, Triton's a little further afield in terms of like sharing the market with Ranger. But do you think that those guys really need to be picking up their game to be able to compete with Ranger? And I'll open this up to the floor because I know you spent a bit of time in one of the updated Tritons. Do you think that those guys need to actually spend some more time and investment in getting their tech up to scratch?
Yeah, I mean, I think I spoke about this on the last podcast I featured in, but the driver attention technology in the Triton was just, it made me so angry.
You're still angry, I can tell.
It's just not well calibrated at all. And it's the kind of thing that it really destroys the driving experience. And I spent a very small amount of time in a Hilux recently, but James could probably speak better to that one.
Where do you stand on it, James?
Well, I haven't driven the mild hybrid Hilux yet, and I know that Toyota doesn't want to have the hybrid branding in there, but you look at the Triton was a generational change and it's still sort of playing catch up. The Hilux thing is, sort of a response to demand for electrification, but that's the only solution they can do right now. And even still, without either of those options, the Ranger is still quite far ahead. And then you look at the 4x4 SUV segment, and the Everest is by far the leader compared to everything else. Now, I think what will be interesting is when the new Prado lobs, because that will have the same mild hybrid system, but it's a massive tech change that the Hilux is still yet to go through. And so it'll be interesting to see what the reception is there and how that translates into the sales charts. But I think with the Ute segment's typically been behind the passenger segments. Ford and subsequently Volkswagen with the Amarok are one of the first companies to really align what they specify their heavy duty stuff in terms of like safety and assistance tech compared to or relative to their passenger range. So it's I don't think that the Range is necessarily in trouble of losing top spot unless people really focus on the fact that the Hilux has a 48-volt system. But I think Ford's also starting to introduce like idle stop start and more Euro 6 derivatives of the Ranger, and the Everest is already Euro 6 across the board. So you've already got stuff with AdBlue that people who pay attention to it might see that emissions and fuel consumption is a little bit lower, and it's sort of like peace of mind that you're doing your bit to reduce your impact. You're not necessarily going EV, but you're at least reducing your impact with what you're getting.
Well, would you consider buying a Ranger even with these price updates? Leave a comment, let us know. All right, guys, time for our picks of the week. Josh, as our special guest, I'm going to let you go first. What is your pick this week, mate?
So it might not be all that exciting to everyone, but I noticed during the week that they've opened up Nissan Z orders for the Nismo model and past the original 100 units. I love these cars as a kid, the 350 and the 370Z, and it shows that people are still buying them, not in massive volume, but basically you can go in and say you want to buy a Z Nismo now and Nissan will have you a car. And it's not quite the same car as the Zs of old. It's a bit heavier, turbocharged now. Many are saying it's more of a Grand Tourer than perhaps a sports car, but I'm just excited that it still exists and people are still buying them.
Well, I've tried to climb in and out of a Nissan Z, and I can tell you it's definitely a sports car. But if you are a Nissan dealer and you have a great deal on a Nissan Z Nismo for Josh, write to us, podcast@carexpert.com.au. James, what is your pick this week, mate?
So I'm doing another plug of a really cool Instagrammer that I've found. He goes by Pwuff. It's like PWUF. He's a young guy from America that does all these really funky reviews on really weird and wacky stuff. So one that I saw this week was it was his Bentley Turbo something wagon. It was like the old Arnage era of Bentleys that was sort of like the last of the Rolls-Royce based ones. And it's this bright blue wagon-bodied Arnage thing, and it's got all these really weird features. Like it has a country horn as well as a normal horn. So there's two buttons.
Was it moo or something?
Yeah, it almost sounds like a tractor or like something like that. It's very interesting, and there's a lot of really cool features that you think in the 90s, the fact that people had access to this kind of stuff in the 90s that were all electrical based, it's like, wow, this stuff has existed for a really, really long time, as long as you had the coin. So check his stuff out, because there's some really cool cars that we sometimes don't get in Australia, or he just has a different perspective, and he's got a really interesting way of presenting as well. He'll sort of hold the phone like this, and he has like those little tiny hands that you slip on the end of your finger. He'll sort of like clap the camera when he goes between takes, which is quite funny. So that was my pick of the week.
Now, for those of you that have followed the podcast for a while, you know I often spend my pick of the week talking about motor racing, and today is no different because Lando Norris won his first Formula One Grand Prix.
Yay!
Igor was pumping his fist back. I was so happy. It was absolutely worth getting up at 5-something this morning and watching that. Normally Miami Grand Prix is a bit of a dull one, but to see that Papaya McLaren cross the line first, quite a long way in front of Max Verstappen, was very, very awesome. So massive shout out to Lando Norris. I know he watches this podcast, so good on you, mate. Good job. Guys, that brings us to the end this week. Next week, we are finally going to do our deep dive into the costs of owning an EV. We're talking tires, insurance, resale. We're even going to have a special guest come on and talk about their experience owning an EV. 10 internet points if you can guess who that is. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this week, guys?
We've just got, again, I think this is the theme that I've said on every final thought, is that we've just got so much going on as a team. Scott's currently overseas. I'm going on a couple of launches. I'm driving the Volvo EX30 this week, which I'm really excited to drive.
That's been a long time coming, that
Yeah,
car.
and there's been a lot of really, really good feedback from overseas outlets. So I'm just keen to see how it translates to Australian roads and how it fits in our market. So there's that, and then there's just so many launches going on at the moment. So a lot of exciting new cars.
Josh, anything from you?
I'm heading to South Australia for a four-wheel drive training course with Isuzu.
Oh, Adventure Club.
Yeah,
Very
Adventure
excited.
Club. So if anyone sees me in the Flinders Ranges kind of teetering over the side of a cliff in a D-Max, it's probably me.
Yeah, if you see anyone with some nice hair like wandering along a desert highway, it may also be Josh. Please stop and pick him up, give him a lift. We need him back here. Guys, thank you so much for coming along. Josh, thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us. We're going to be back next week, as we said, with all of the finer details of owning an EV. So if there's anything you want us to cover, leave a comment and let us know. Boys, thank you very much. We'll see you all next week.